STEM fans, are you ready? Let's hear it for the world-class NASA STEM Stars team. From NASA centers across the country, we present Astronaut Christina Koch.
Hello and welcome to this week's NASA STEM Stars. Each week we connect with subject matter experts from around the agency to learn about their journey and their career with NASA. At the end of today's episode, I will challenge you to complete your own mission and encourage you to share your work with us. I'm Jen Hudgens, and I'm coming to you from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and I'm so excited to share today's guest with you. We're kicking off Women's History Month with a record-breaking astronaut and can't wait for you to hear her story. As a reminder, you can type your questions in the chat window and we will try to answer as many as possible. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming astronaut Christina Koch to the show. Welcome, Christina, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jen. It's great to be with you and with all of the future and current STEM stars out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. So I know all of the students out there are super curious about how do I become an astronaut? I want to be her when I grow up. So can you start by telling us your journey and how you got to where you are?
Absolutely. And I can tell you that I also wanted to be an astronaut from the time I was very young. And one of the funny things is I just never really grew out of it. I think a lot of people think about it as something you want to do when you're young. But the truth is, if you stick with it, it is something that can carry you through in your career. One of the things that I think is important is considering the whole person, not just what you study in school and not just what your work life is, but the other things that keep you constantly exploring and pushing your boundaries. And for me, those were things and still are things like fitness, travel, doing sports that kind of make me have to use my head and physical fitness all at once and have that focus and learn how to get through challenging situations. So that's something that I feel is part of kind of who I am. But in terms of where we started, so for me, as I mentioned, it started when I was very young in school. And one of the things I did and that my parents helped me out with was they sent me to space camp. So I went to space camp in middle school and in high school. And that was where I really just got to meet other people that had the same interests as I did and learn more about the space program. And another thing that I like to think about back to my time in middle school was what inspired me way back then and what drove me to pursue this goal to be an astronaut. And when I think about my room, I had posters of space up on my wall. And also I had posters of Antarctica up on my wall. These were places that drew me in because they were places on the frontier where people were doing science and exploration. And it turns out those were some of the key elements of the career that I ended up going into. So the picture you just saw was a picture of my room in high school with a poster of the shuttle up. For me, once I graduated from high school, I went to North Carolina State University. I'm from North Carolina, and I studied physics and electrical engineering. For me, I loved both the theoretical stuff and the hands-on part of building, so that's why I wanted to study both science and engineering. And when I graduated, I actually first went into being an engineer at NASA. And in that role, I worked in a lab and I did space science instrumentation. So I worked in a NASA lab where I was able to work on the space gadgets that fly on planetary probes. And along with that, I ended up pursuing my dream to go to Antarctica. And I worked in places as far off as the South Pole for an entire year. I worked in another Antarctic base called Palmer Station. And I also worked in Greenland. In those places, I got to do things like climbing on scientific towers to repair things while completely bundled up in my cold weather gear. And I got to contribute to science missions where the researchers weren't with me, but I got to be their eyes and ears on the ground running their experiments. And another important aspect of my career, in addition to being an engineer and being a field engineer in remote places, was pursuing hobbies. And for me, rock climbing was one of those hobbies that really allowed me to push myself. It helped me develop a sense of focus in high stakes instances. I did a type of climbing called lead climbing, where you don't necessarily have a rope above your head and you're protecting yourself and staying safe by putting in your own climbing protection as you go. And this really taught me a lot of the skills that I've ended up applying throughout my astronaut career. So at this point in my career, with that experience behind me, I ended up applying to the astronaut program. And I found myself as one of a member of 8 in my class of astronauts in 2013.
Wow. So if a student is thinking about wanting to be an astronaut, what kind of qualities do you think made you stand out among all of the hundreds of applications that come in? And if only 8 were you have chosen, what do you think made you stand out?
I think about that all the time because I feel like the luckiest person in the world to be where I am. And I think one quality that I've observed makes astronauts successful around me is adaptability. The ability to not necessarily worry about your environment as necessary for contributing to your success, but pulling together what you need to be successful with the resources that you have, and not necessarily expecting a whole lot out of it, but recognizing that you can bring solutions to a place. So, environmental adaptability. I think I learned that through living in Antarctica many times. Situational adaptability in tough situations, I learned through rock climbing. And just, really being someone that can thrive in those types of circumstances is something that I think is really helpful.
So now that you have been chosen for an astronaut candidate, did you have to relocate? I have a student, Emil, wanted to know, where do you live now?
Yeah, great question. And there's a slide on the presentation with all 8 of us, and I can use that slide to talk a little bit about that, because the 8 astronauts that were selected are from very diverse backgrounds. We have people from the military that had actually traveled and been stationed in many places themselves. People that were scientists, engineers. So I personally was living in Montana at the time, and we all had to relocate to Houston, where we kind of came together as a team, brought all of our life skills and all of our experiences that we had gained together at that point, and started the training that would turn us all into astronauts.
So can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to train like an astronaut and learn how to do that?
Definitely. The astronaut candidate period is the time period of about 2 years where you're training to actually become flight eligible for a NASA mission. And we've got some slides to show that. Some of the toughest training and the most exciting training was the flight training. So we do learn how to fly a T-38 jet that NASA has a fleet of for our space flight readiness training, which means people like me that are used to solving problems maybe at a desk or out in the field now have to solve problems at supersonic speeds as they come up. And this picture that you see on the right shows my desk, where I used to actually chair fly my missions while I was in training. And I bring that up as an example of how sometimes things that are really challenging don't necessarily come easy, but you have to do a lot of creative studying, a lot of dedicated work to get to where you need to be. Another part of our training is learning how to spacewalk. And NASA has a huge pool. It's 40 foot deep, 200 feet by 100 feet wide, and there's an entire mock-up of the space station in this pool, and we actually get in spacesuits and train in that pool. And that was some of the most challenging physically and mentally training that I have ever done. This is a picture of me and my colleague, my astronaut classmate, Victor Glover, who's actually in space right now and just did a spacewalk a couple days ago. And he and I had the same final exam together. And I think when we got out of the pool that day and I found out that I had actually passed, it was one of the happiest days of my life. And I'll never forget that I got to share that with Victor.
And I'm sure at the time you wouldn't have known that you were going to be one of 2 female spacewalks and, break a record. That is amazing. So you're actually in the Guinness Book of World Records now too, which is an amazing accomplishment for the longest time in space for female. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's
awesome.
For one mission. Yes. And you're
Wow.
absolutely right. I had no idea, actually, at that time, I had no idea that there hadn't been an all-female spacewalk already. It was not on my radar at all that was something that I would have the honor of participating in. But when it certainly did come, it was an honor for both Jessica and I. We really felt like it was a way to say thank you and pay homage to the people that paved the way for us to be where we were.
I'm sure that was a very fulfilling 2 years of training and learning new skills. And, I'm sure you love
Yes,
learning new things. So I'm sure that was a very exciting time.
it
So
was. I called it,
now,
yes.
yeah, so I was going to say, so the NBL training or the neutral buoyancy lab training that you did, you said that was your graduation when you complete that. That's your final graduation from the program. So then
From
you
that
officially,
particular flow.
okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what, go ahead.
I was going to say we like to call it learn 5 careers in 2 years period, because we had to do all kinds of things like learn all the engineering of the space station, learn how to speak Russian, learn how to operate the robotic arm on the space station. So it was a whole lot of different things. But you're right. I think for me, the biggest hill to climb was that spacewalk training. So that moment felt like the top of the mountain to me.
So since you mentioned learning how to speak Russian, which I can't imagine was very easy, we did have a question from Chris that wanted to know about cultural differences with residences or the residents on the ISS. Tight quarters and those traits must have been challenging with the different cultures. So can you talk to that a little bit about what it was like to live with other cultures?
Absolutely. There's a great slide that shows actually 9 people on board the space station all enjoying a group meal together. And you're exactly right, from all different cultures, from all over the globe. And to me, that is one of the most important things about the International Space Station and about a lot of scientific and technological endeavors and careers out there, is that usually when we're seeking knowledge and making discoveries, we're doing it to benefit all of humanity, which often means that it comes through international partnerships. We definitely do cross-cultural training. There are, multiple languages spoken on the International Space Station. I personally launched on a Russian rocket called a Soyuz and did many months of training in Russia in order to be able to do that. And I think demonstrating these partnerships for something that's so difficult and demonstrating we can be successful in doing it, no matter what the condition is on the Earth between countries, is just a wonderful legacy that the space station has.
Can you talk to the students a little bit about, I think you have a slide there of the rocket that took you to space from Russia. Can you talk to the students about what does it feel like to launch on the top of a rocket like that?
For sure. And you're exactly right. In talking about what we actually do day to day, our job is to fly into space. I do have a video that demonstrates a little bit about what the launch is like and shows a little clip of what it feels like to actually be in this tiny little Soyuz capsule. So we'll see if that video can come up and I'll just talk about it. But launch day is interesting because it's actually a lot like your normal training days. It feels the same in the capsule as the simulator that we train on. And the only difference is that when that countdown reaches 0, you actually start moving and you begin going up for 8 minutes straight. And you know that when that final stage of that rocket shuts down, you're going to feel yourself floating, even underneath the straps that you've been cinched down in. And that's exactly what it's like. I was fortunate to launch with my classmate, Nick Hague. And when we got to the top of that hill and we felt ourselves in microgravity, we looked over at each other and smiled because we knew that we were finally there.
Okay, it looks like we've got that video queued, so we'll go ahead and play that now.
Onboard power. Launch command issued for ignition.
Launch command has been issued. Telecom second.
So we might mute the video and you can tell us what we're watching here. Okay.
Okay, sure. So the space capsule or the spacecraft that we're in actually resides under the fairings right at the top pointy end of that rocket. And then after these 8 minutes where the various stages of the rocket are ignited, there are 3 stages on a Soyuz rocket. the fairings actually open up and your little spacecraft is just released to orbit Earth. And then there's about a 6-hour time that it takes to actually rendezvous with the space station before you dock to the space station and come on board. So this is just an incredible moment where it kind of feels like the sensation of being on a roller coaster. You do get up to about 3 Gs in acceleration. So you feel your own weight pressing on you to 3 times as much as it normally would feel like on Earth. And you're really tightly packed in. As you can see there, that's my hand turning that valve. And the 3 of us are all in there taking care of our duties as we get into space and get that orbital insertion. So pretty cool.
So can you tell us a bit about once you're finally in space and you're docked to the ISS and you're finally home, what is it like to live and work in space?
Well, we do a lot of just that work. Our work consists of a couple main things, and the most important of which is science. That's the whole reason we have an International Space Station. So we have this engineering marvel that is the space station, and its whole purpose is to do science. So it's kind of just, an example of STEM in and of itself. But we do science that cannot physically be done on Earth because of the space environment, and typically that's the microgravity environment. So one of my favorite experiments that I have a picture of was me looking through a microscope at protein crystals that we were seeing and making for the very first time ever, because we can't actually even make these protein crystals on Earth because of gravity. These types of things are used to help develop pharmaceuticals, to fight cancer and other diseases. So it was an amazing feeling of discovery that had such a strong application to things that matter on Earth. And then another example of the science we do is growing plants on board the space station. Not only do we learn about the plants, but we learn how we might be able to go deeper into space using our own food. And then secondly, we do a lot of maintenance. We keep the space station going. We fix things as they break or as the space environment breaks them, and we upgrade the space station so that it's constantly able to do more and more science and learn, and we're constantly able to do more and more of bringing those benefits that we discover back to Earth. Another thing, of course, that we do are those spacewalks, and that's such a fun thing for astronauts. It's kind of this professional career culmination where we get to put all of our skills to work to keep the space station running at peak performance.
So I think we do have a picture of you during a spacewalk, and then you can see the photo there of mission control people supporting that spacewalk. So you actually have to go outside to fix things sometimes, correct?
That's right. So normally we just are in regular clothes working on board the inside of the space station, but every once in a while we put on those spacewalking spacesuits and we get to go outside to fix things. And this is that really challenging work that I talked about. They're usually about 7 hours long. You're in the spacesuit for about 12 hours total. And you're working with a team of people on the ground, guiding you through every step of the way, telling you the steps that you need to do. And they're there for you also when things potentially go wrong. So our team on the ground for this particular spacewalk is pictured there. And, it just wouldn't be complete without talking about the teamwork there. That's actually what makes it great.
And I think you brought a video with you today too, with you and I believe Jessica doing a spacewalk together.
Yes, that's right. We were able to take out a video camera and get some footage of us doing some of the hour by hour work out there. And I really like this series of videos because it just kind of shows what it feels like to be out in open space where you don't have a window between you and the vacuum of space. It's just you in your spacesuit and working together and kind of what that feels like, both the views of Earth and the focus that it takes to get the job done in that kind of challenging environment. And Jessica and I, the spacewalk that we did was to do what you saw the title there, a battery upgrade. So we were actually changing out the batteries on the space station to a new kind that are more efficient. And you can see the solar array behind Jessica there extending up away from Earth into space as she starts to get into what we have what we call a foot restraint so that she can do simple work.
So you trained to do that kind of work in a swimming pool. So a student asked, what was your experience spacewalking like? So is it similar to swimming? Is it very disorienting, floating above the Earth that way? Can you describe what that feels like?
It can be very disorienting. It's disorienting, especially at night, because you don't have gravity to tell you which way is down or up. And so you just have to completely rely on your own kind of three-dimensional image of the space station and where you are on it, which can definitely turn you around. At night, you only have a short kind of range light to see what's just in front of you. You can't look to the side and see where the rest of the path that you're translating on is. So it can be very disorienting. But luckily, we have a great ground team that makes sure that you stay on the right task and that, you don't get lost out there.
Awesome. So let's go to see what kind of questions we've been getting from students now that we're talking more about what it's like to be an astronaut in space. What kinds of long-term effects on your body from being on the ISS so long have you been able to reverse or successfully manage? And that's from Selena.
Sure. The biggest one that I'll talk about is muscle and bone density loss. And I do have a photo of me running on the space treadmill if they're able to pull that up. But I'll tell you that in the absence of gravity, there's actually your body on its own would lose muscle and bone density because there's just you're not even lifting your own body weight as you move around. So we have a very regimented exercise schedule where we exercise 2 hours a day, and it includes both cardio and weightlifting or resistance training, which we have a special machine to do since obviously nothing weighs anything in space. So those are some of the big ones, but there are others that might surprise you. There are changes to the heart because of how it has to pump differently, not having to pump against the gravity, the Earth's gravity. There are changes actually for some people with their eyesight and their eyes. There are changes in your kidneys. And then also your neurovestibular system. Obviously, your inner ear that normally tells you which way you're pointed, it has to actually shut off, or your brain stops listening to that organ because it's not sending any signals that make any sense while you're up there. So when you come home, it's actually very hard to walk because you don't have that system working, and you have to relearn to kind of reincorporate your vestibular system. So there's a lot of changes that take place, and actually studying those is a big part of what the science is that we do on board, because we want to know how long, we can have a mission and hopefully go out to Mars one day, which would be maybe 1.5 years long, maybe longer.
And I think that we have some information about sleeping in space. We had a question about what is it like to sleep in space? So I think maybe if we pull up that video, I think that would probably tell the greatest story that
definitely
can show students what that's like. So
sleeping in space is great, and I will allow everyone to see this video. So a lot of times people ask why, how do you sleep in space, or why do you have to sleep in a sleeping bag in space? So first of all, this video is going to show you guys why. This is me in the lab module of the space station, and I'm just utilizing these kind of bags of cargo as what would be a bed and what we don't use in space, and show you what happens if you actually try to lay down in space. And you can see it doesn't really work very well. Because you would just float away. And actually, this is a weird feeling to get used to when you first get to space, because we're so used to this, the sense of being able to just plop into a chair or on a bed and go to sleep at night. And then if we go forward in this video, you can see, so since we can't sleep like I'm trying to do here, what do we do instead? And what we do instead is we actually use a sleeping bag. So we'll see if we can fast forward to that part here in a minute. And I will tell you on
orders there.
Yes, on the space station, we all have, our bedrooms are very small. They're about the size of a phone booth, and they're situated on the ceiling, on the floor, on the side. So my bedroom is actually on the ceiling. So you can see here, I'm actually popping up into the ceiling of the space station. And then when I reorient sideways, you can't even tell the difference of whether or not you're straight up and down or sideways. So here I'm showing how you first get into the sleeping bag, which is, of course, attached to the wall in your tiny little crew quarters. And you have to basically zip yourself up, because if you didn't, after you fell asleep, you would just float around aimlessly around the space station all night, and who knows where you would wake up or what you would bump along the way. But it is wonderful, peaceful sleep. For me, it was way more comfortable than sleeping on Earth. I had some of the best sleep ever in space, and our sleeping bags have little holes for your arms so that you can stick your arms out, and they usually just float in front of you. You kind of look like a zombie while you're sleeping. So that is typical sleep posture in space.
That looks very cozy.
Yes,
I heard it's very similar to like sleeping on a raft in a swimming pool, kind of.
Yes, you could say that for sure.
Okay, so we have tons of questions, Christina. So I hope you're ready for all of these great questions. So we have a question from Jenny in Winburn Middle School. What do you enjoy about your astronaut career?
I think the thing I enjoy the most is the teamwork. And there's a great slide that I prepared for this that hopefully we can show of what a team on board the space station is like. And that camaraderie that you have with your crew and with the teams on the ground that you know that you're working with and that are supporting the mission is just so important. And it's such a great feeling. In this particular picture with the 9 of us, normally there's only about 6 people on board the space station, but we had a short period where we had 9 folks. The first ever astronaut from the United Arab Emirates was also there, along with our Russian colleagues and a European astronaut. And so just that sense of international camaraderie is definitely a highlight of the job that I do. And then actually the next slide shows that same camaraderie with our ground teams. So we do celebrate Christmas on board the space station, and in the background is a picture, a live picture shown on the big TV at Mission Control of us on board the space station. And in front of that picture is the mission control team that was with us over Christmas. And these people came in, and of course, right on Christmas Day to be with us and run the space station and keep us safe. And we truly felt like we were one big family celebrating that day.
So we have a question from the Plasmeyer family. They want to know what went through your mind when you first saw our precious planet Earth from space above.
I was completely stunned, and it happened when I was in the tiny little Soyuz vehicle. Again, I don't know if they have the pictures, but there is a picture of the Soyuz vehicle with the Earth behind it that maybe could flash up. And I looked out of the little window while we were on our way to the space station. It was not long after the rocket cut off and we were suddenly quietly floating just autonomously in the blackness of space. And I opened my window and looked down, and bright as you can imagine was the Earth below me. And nothing anyone could have told me could have prepared me to see that from that view. And actually, I exclaimed something like, "Oh my goodness." And my crewmates weren't sure what I was talking about. Maybe they were startled and wondering if maybe I had seen something that they hadn't. So I learned that in a small spacecraft, don't necessarily surprise people by saying, "Oh my goodness." And as soon as they knew that it was just my first time ever seeing Earth from space, they understood exactly what was going on.
So we had an interesting question, and I kind of want to know the answer to this one as well. So Jen wants to know, not me, another Jen, can you wear contacts in space?
You can wear contacts in space. For me, and it sort of depends on why you have your contacts. For example, if you have contacts that have to remain in a certain orientation and do that with a weighting of the contact lens, that doesn't necessarily work in space. So that was actually my case. And so I ended up wearing my glasses in space, as you may have seen in some of the pictures. But I preferred to wear my contacts when I was doing spacewalks. So I did wear contacts while I was doing spacewalks, but most of the time during the day, I just wear glasses.
Perfect. That was a good answer because I was curious too. Did you face any challenges or obstacles as a woman astronaut?
I would say absolutely. Yes, definitely. I think throughout my STEM career, I have faced challenges, and some of those are just overcoming the sense of being the only woman in the room sometimes. There were plenty of times in meetings or teams where I might have been the only female there. And, sometimes that ends up, turns into just funny anecdotes that come out of that. And sometimes it can be hard. It could maybe feel lonely. I think that's changing right now. So I hope that people that choose those STEM careers now don't face necessarily what I did. But for me to overcome that, I would think about the women that came before me when they were literally maybe the first person in their entire university, and the attention, the extra scrutiny, then extra expectation to maybe represent your entire gender, those things that they face so much more of than even I did. And it reminded me to be strong and to continue to give my best every day and to focus on being the best I could be and be excellent in my job and not just being there and participating. And that really helped me focus on the mission more so than the additional challenges that were brought along because I'm a woman.
Okay. Parker would like to know, do you know when you get to go to space again?
I do not necessarily know, but I do hope to go back one day. It was an amazing thing to be a part of, an amazing thing to contribute to, and I want to keep giving back and doing that.
So I think it's important that the students know that you've been chosen as one of the Artemis astronauts, which means that you may have a chance to go to the moon someday. So I think that's pretty exciting. So congratulations on being selected to that team. Yeah. Let's see, maybe one more question Michael would like to know. Do you use Wi-Fi in space?
We do use Wi-Fi. There is Wi-Fi on board the space station, and the funniest thing ever is that there is a password. So anyone coming up and, coming near the space station from somewhere else would have to know the password before they got on our Wi-Fi. No sharing.
Yep, good to know, good to know. All right, so we are getting ready to end our episode. So I do want to tell the students a couple things, and then I'll give you a chance to maybe give some last encouraging words to the students. So next, your mission, what are we challenging you to do? So we have an awesome activity where you can learn how to code and create your own video game to dock to the International Space Station. So we encourage you to go to this website. We'll drop it in the chat for you so you can click on it and check it out. And then we would like you to share your video game with us. Show us what you've made on the hashtag NextGenSTEM. And then next week, we are going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station with a program manager, Ann Garber, and that'll be next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And to make sure that you don't miss any more of our NASA STEM Stars episodes, make sure you hit that subscribe button down at the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic back over to Christina to give you some last final minute inspiring words.
Thank you, Jen. I think one thing I'd love to leave everyone with is the answer that I often give when people ask me for what advice I might have for people pursuing any career that they're passionate about. And number one, it is just that, pursue what you're passionate about. But I like to follow that up with do what scares you. And that doesn't mean take, unnecessary risk, but what it does mean is oftentimes things that scare you or intimidate you are things that you're intrigued with, but they might seem like they're just out of reach for you. And I think those are the things that you should point yourself in the direction of. Those are the achievements that once you do, you'll find extra enthusiasm, a sense of accomplishment that will drive you further and make you realize that there really is so much more you can accomplish than you might think. And secondly, I'd like to leave you all with the words to support each other. I think when we focus on supporting the people around us and not just ourselves, it helps us to learn the qualities that we can incorporate in our own lives to make us successful, but it also makes us achieve a greater community success and makes us recognize that the real goal is to contribute collectively in the best way that we can to have the highest and most collective achievements kind of given back into the world. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of today. It's been a great conversation, Jen.
Thank you, Christina, for those very inspiring and encouraging words of advice. We're going to leave you now with a great video of her welcome home by her awesome dog, Sadie. And I just want to say thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time, STEM fans. Hi. Hi.